The ship was dying. Commander Valeth knew this as she stood on the bridge of the Starfall and watched the warning lights flash red across every console. 3 of her 4 engines were dead. The hull had 17 breaches sealed only by emergency barriers that could fail at any moment. 400 of her crew were wounded, and 63 were already gone. The medical bay had run out of supplies 2 days ago. They had fled the massacre at Kelrith Prime, with nothing but their lives and a desperate hope that they might find somewhere to hide. The Sol system appeared on their navigation charts as a yellow dot in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy. The intelligence report said this system contained a young species called humans. They had only recently discovered space travel. They were primitive by galactic standards. They had no fleet and no real weapons. But they had a planet with breathable air and resources that might help the Starfall survive long, enough to reach friendly territory. Valeth made the decision without consulting her officers. There was no time for debate. She ordered the ship to enter the Sol system and approach the 3rd planet from the star. She expected to find a simple world with simple people who would either flee in terror or attempt some futile resistance. She would take what she needed and leave. It was not honorable, but survival rarely was. She was wrong about everything. The humans detected the Starfall within minutes of its arrival. Valeth watched her sensor officer track the dozens of satellites that turned toward them and the communication signals that exploded across the planet below. She prepared for panic. She prepared for primitive weapons fire. She prepared for the chaos that always came when a lesser species encountered something beyond their understanding. Instead, she received a calm voice speaking in awkward but understandable Corvani. Someone on that planet had been listening to galactic communications long enough to learn her language. Unknown vessel, this is Houston Space Command. We have detected damage to your ship. Do you require assistance? Valeth stared at the communication console. In her 300 years of military service, she had visited 32 star systems and encountered 19 intelligent species. Not once had a first contact begun with an offer of help. She responded carefully. This is Commander Valeth of the Corvani vessel Starfall. We have suffered significant damage and casualties. We request permission to conduct repairs in your system. The response came quickly. Permission granted. We are dispatching medical and engineering teams to your location. Please transmit your docking requirements and any specific supply needs. Valeth turned to her first officer, a scarred veteran named Torith, who had served beside her for 60 years. His compound eyes were wide with confusion that matched her own. It is a trap, he said quietly. It must be. Perhaps, Valeth replied. But we have no choice. We cannot run any further. 6 hours later, the first human shuttles docked with the Starfall. Valeth went to meet them personally with an armed escort of her best soldiers. The airlock opened, and she found herself facing a group of small, soft creatures in simple spacesuits. They carried boxes of medical supplies and toolkits. They carried no weapons. The human at the front of the group removed his helmet. He was a male with brown skin and dark eyes that showed no fear at all as he looked up at Valeth. She towered over him by nearly 2 feet. Her forearms could have broken him in half. Her soldiers behind her carried weapons that could vaporize him in an instant. He smiled and extended one of his hands toward her. Commander Valeth? I am Lieutenant Commander Jack Harris. Welcome to our solar system. We brought what we could on short notice, but more supplies are coming. Just tell us what you need. Valeth did not take his hand. She did not understand the gesture. Why are you helping us? You do not know us. You do not know why we are here or what we have done. Jack Harris lowered his hand, but his smile did not fade. I can see your ship is damaged. I can see your people are hurt. That is enough for now. The rest we can figure out later. There will be a price, Valeth said. There is always a price. There really is not. Not for this anyway. You needed help, and we can help. That is just what we do. Valeth studied him for a long moment. She had negotiated with warlords and diplomats and merchants across the galaxy. She knew how to read deception in any species. She saw none in this human. You are either very foolish or very dangerous, she said finally. Jack Harris laughed. It was a warm sound that echoed strangely in the damaged corridor. Probably a bit of both. Now let us get your wounded to our medical teams. We have doctors waiting who are very excited to learn about Corvani biology. The next 12 hours changed everything Valeth thought she knew about the universe. Human doctors worked alongside her medical staff to save lives that should have been lost. Human engineers crawled through damaged sections of her ship and began repairs with a speed and creativity that stunned her crew. They asked questions constantly. They learned faster than any species she had ever encountered. They made mistakes and laughed and tried again. They treated her wounded soldiers with a gentleness that seemed impossible from such fragile creatures. A human nurse named Beth Crawford sat beside a dying Corvani warrior and held his hand through his final moments. She spoke soft words he could not understand, but somehow found peace in nonetheless. When he was gone, she closed his eyes with careful respect and then moved on to help the next patient. Valeth found Jack Harris in a corridor late that night. He was exhausted. His eyes were red and his movements were slow. But he was still working, still helping. Why? She asked him again. Your people gain nothing from this. Jack leaned against the wall and considered her question. Maybe we gain something you cannot see yet. Maybe we just like helping people. Maybe we remember what it was like to be alone and scared, and we do not want anyone else to feel that way. He shrugged. Does it matter why? We are here. We are helping. That is what counts. Valeth realized in that moment that she had stumbled upon something far more significant than a primitive backwater world. These humans with their soft bodies and short lives and strange customs were something new. Something the galaxy had never seen before. She did not know yet whether that was wonderful or terrifying. Perhaps it was both. The repair effort grew beyond anything Valeth had imagined possible. Within 3 days of the Starfall's arrival, there were over 200 humans working aboard her ship. Within a week, that number had grown to 500. Shuttles arrived constantly from the planet below carrying supplies and equipment and volunteers, who seemed genuinely eager to help complete strangers from another world. The humans built a temporary station in orbit to serve as a repair dock. They constructed it in 11 days. Valeth had seen similar structures take months to build. When she asked how they had done it so quickly, a young engineer named Maria Vance just shrugged and said they had been motivated. Maria Vance fascinated Valeth. The woman was small even by human standards, with dark hair that she kept tied back and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. She was a propulsion specialist from something called Caltech, and she had not slept in 3 days. Valeth found her crawling through the Starfall's engine compartment at odd hours, asking questions that no one had thought to ask in 3,000 years. Your ion channeling system is amazing, Maria told Chief Engineer Korath during one of their many conversations. The basic design is elegant, but you are losing so much efficiency through thermal bleed. Look at this junction here. The heat dispersal is completely wrong. Korath stared at her with something between offense and amazement. That design has served the Corvani fleet for 30 centuries. I am not saying it is bad. I am saying it could be better. If we reroute the secondary coolant through this manifold and add a heat sink here, we could cut your energy loss by almost 25%. That is impossible, Maria smiled. It was the same confident smile that Jack Harris wore. "Let me show you." She was right. Korath spent 3 hours reviewing her calculations and running simulations and checking her work. The modification she proposed would improve engine efficiency by 23%. A human who had been studying Corvani technology for less than a week had improved upon designs that had remained unchanged since before her species had learned to use fire. Similar scenes played out across the ship. Human doctors developed new treatment protocols for Corvani wounds. Human metallurgists analyzed hull plating and suggested stronger alloy compositions. Human computer specialists wrote software patches that made navigation systems faster and more accurate. They did not simply repair the starfall. They made it better. Senior medic Beth Crawford became something of a legend among the Corvani wounded. She worked 18-hour shifts without complaint. She learned to speak basic Corvani within 2 weeks. She held the hands of dying soldiers and comforted them in their final moments. She celebrated with those who recovered and mourned with the families of those who did not. One evening, Valith found Beth sitting alone in a quiet corridor. The human woman looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she held a cup of something hot. "You push yourself too hard," Valith said. Beth looked up and smiled. "I could say the same about you, Commander." Valith sat down beside her. It was an informal gesture that would have been unthinkable a week ago. "May I ask you something?" "Of course. Why do you care so much?" "These are not your people. This is not your war. You owe us nothing." Beth considered the question for a long moment. "Do you know why I became a doctor? When I was young, my brother was very sick. We did not have much money, and we lived far from any hospital. A doctor drove 6 hours through a storm to reach us. She saved his life. She did not know us. She had no reason to help, except that someone needed help and she could give it." She took a sip from her cup. "I never forgot that. The idea that a stranger would sacrifice so much for someone she had never met. It changed how I saw the world. I became a doctor because I wanted to be that person for someone else. When your ship arrived, I saw people who needed help. The fact that you are from another planet does not change that. Pain is pain. Fear is fear. The need for kindness does not have a species." Valith was quiet for a long time. In Corvani culture, kindness was transactional. You helped those who could help you in return. You formed alliances based on mutual benefit. The concept of pure selfless compassion was foreign to her in a way that made her uncomfortable. "Your species has seen much war," she said finally. "I have read your history. You have committed terrible violence against each other." "We have," Beth agreed. "We are not perfect. We have done awful things, and we will probably do awful things again. But we have also done beautiful things. We have built and created and dreamed. We have loved each other and sacrificed for each other and lifted each other up. Humans are capable of great darkness, but we are also capable of great light. We get to choose which one we embrace. And you choose light?" Beth smiled sadly. "I try to. Every day I try to. Some days are harder than others." 3 weeks after the Starfall's arrival, the ship was fully repaired. The engines ran better than they had when the vessel was new. The hull was stronger. The weapons systems were upgraded. The medical bay was restocked with supplies that would last for years. But something else had changed too. The Corvani crew no longer looked at humans as primitive curiosities. They had worked beside them and learned from them, and in some cases formed genuine friendships with them. The barriers between two species had begun to crumble. Valith called a meeting with Jack Harris and the other human leaders. It was time to tell them the truth. It was time to explain why the Starfall had been running and what was coming for them all. She owed them that much. She owed them everything. The humans had restored her ship and saved her crew. Now she had to warn them about the storm that was approaching their small blue world. She had to tell them about the Dominion. The conference room aboard the orbital station was silent as Valeth spoke. She stood at the head of a long table surrounded by humans who had become something close to friends over the past 3 weeks. Jack Harris sat to her right. Maria Vance and Beth Crawford were there along with Admiral Kevin Patterson, who had been appointed to oversee military cooperation, and a dozen other officials whose names she had learned to remember. Video screens showed the faces of leaders from nations across the planet below. Every major government on Earth was listening. The Dominion has conquered 400 worlds, Valeth said. Her voice was steady, but inside she felt something close to shame. She had accepted their help without telling them the full truth. Now she had to confess. They have existed for 10,000 years. They do not negotiate. They do not accept surrender. They find species they consider useful and they enslave them. Species they consider useless, they destroy. She paused to let her words settle. No one spoke. No one moved. My homeworld Kelrath Prime was attacked 6 weeks ago. 8 billion Kurvani lived there. We do not know how many survived. The Dominion fleet was overwhelming. Our military was scattered. We fled because staying meant death. And now they will come here, Admiral Patterson said. It was not a question. Eventually, yes. Your system is remote, but not remote enough. They expand constantly. They map everything. I estimate you have perhaps 10 years before they arrive. Perhaps less. The silence that followed was heavy. Valeth had delivered this kind of news before to other species on other worlds. She knew the usual reactions. Denial came first, followed by fear and then despair. Some species had surrendered immediately, hoping for mercy that would never come. Others had fled, knowing they could never run far enough. She did not know what to expect from humans. Jack Harris leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. His expression was thoughtful rather than frightened. Tell us more about them. Their ships. Their weapons. Their tactics. How do they fight? Their fleet numbers in the thousands. Perhaps tens of thousands. Their ships are larger than anything we have, and their weapons are devastating. They attack in waves designed to overwhelm any defense. They do not value individual lives, including their own. They simply keep coming until their enemies are destroyed. Have they ever been beaten? Valeth hesitated. There are stories, legends of battles where they were pushed back, but I have never seen it happen. No one I know has ever seen it happen. Maria Vance spoke up from her seat near the window. What about their technology? Is it superior to yours? In some ways, yes. In others, we are roughly equal. Their advantage is numbers and ruthlessness. They have been at war for 10,000 years. They know nothing else. Admiral Patterson stood and walked to the window. He stared out at the stars for a long moment. When he turned back, his face was calm and determined. 10 years is not a lot of time, he said. But it is not nothing either. You do not understand, Valeth pressed. Your species has barely achieved interstellar travel. You have no fleet, no planetary defenses, no experience with warfare on this scale. The Dominion has crushed civilizations far more advanced than yours. Commander, Jack Harris said, with that strange human smile, you do not know us very well yet. The meeting continued for hours. The humans asked questions that Valeth had never considered. They wanted to know about Dominion communication systems and supply chains. They wanted to know about morale and command structures and political divisions. They approached the problem like scientists dissecting an organism looking for weaknesses. What struck Valeth most was what she did not see. She did not see panic. She did not see despair. She saw determination and focus, and something that looked almost like excitement. These fragile, short-lived creatures had just learned that an unstoppable force was coming to destroy everything they loved, and their response was to start planning how to fight back. After the formal meeting ended, Jack Harris walked with Valith through the station corridors. They moved in comfortable silence for a while before he spoke. "You expected us to fall apart." "I expected a normal reaction," Valith admitted. "Fear, denial, perhaps anger at me for bringing this danger to your doorstep. Some people will feel those things. Some probably do already. But humans have faced extinction before. Ice ages and plagues and wars and disasters. We always find a way through. It is what we do. The Dominion is not a plague or an ice age. They are an intelligent enemy with weapons beyond your imagination. Then we will learn. We will adapt. We will figure out how to fight them." Valith stopped walking. "Why? You could run. You could scatter across the galaxy and hide. Some of you might survive." Jack turned to face her. His eyes were serious now. All trace of his usual warmth was gone. "Because running is not living. Because our children deserve a future without fear. Because somewhere out there are billions of Corvani who lost their home, and we will not let that happen to ours." He paused. "And because someone has to stand up to these monsters eventually. If not us, then who? If not now, then when?" Valith saw something in him then that she had not fully recognized before. Behind the kindness and the humor, there was steel. These humans smiled and helped strangers and made jokes, but underneath all of that, they were warriors. They had been fighting since the day their species learned to walk upright. War was in their blood in a way that even the Corvani could not match. "You are going to fight them," she said quietly. "We are going to beat them," Jack replied. "And you are going to help us." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact delivered with absolute certainty. Valith looked at this small, soft creature, who should have been terrified, and felt something she had not felt since before Kellerth Prime fell. She felt hope. The transformation of Earth began within days of the conference. Valith watched it happen with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Nations that had been rivals for centuries set aside their differences overnight. Political leaders who had spent careers opposing each other now worked together toward a single goal. The species that had seemed so divided during her first observations unified with a speed that should have been impossible. Admiral Patterson established a unified military command within 1 month. Representatives from every nation agreed to pool their resources and personnel under a single banner. There were arguments and disagreements, but they were resolved quickly because everyone understood what was at stake. The petty conflicts of the past meant nothing when survival itself was threatened. The industrial mobilization was staggering. Factories that had produced cars were retooled to produce fighter components. Shipyards that had built cargo vessels were converted to construct warships. Mining operations expanded across the planet and into the asteroid belt. Every nation contributed what it could. Rich countries provided technology and funding. Developing nations provided labor and raw materials. For the first time in their history, humans worked together as a single species. Maria Vance led the team responsible for adapting Corvani technology. She worked with Karth and dozens of other Corvani engineers to understand every system aboard the Starfall. But the humans did not simply copy what they found. They improved it. A physicist named Benjamin Cole developed a new targeting algorithm that increased weapons accuracy by 40%. He presented his findings at a meeting where Corvani weapons experts listened in stunned silence. Their targeting systems had been considered the best in the galaxy. This human had made them obsolete in 3 months. A young engineer from Singapore named Scott Yang created a shield modulation system that could analyze incoming fire and adapt in real time. Dominion weapons would become less effective with every shot. The technology was revolutionary. Yang was 26 years old and had been working on video games before the Starfall arrived. A team in Germany developed new hull alloys that were stronger and lighter than anything the Kovanni had produced. Researchers in Japan created power systems that generated more energy with less fuel. Engineers in Brazil designed propulsion units that were faster and more maneuverable than the Starfall's upgraded engines. Every day brought new breakthroughs. Humans attacked the problem of survival with a creativity that seemed limitless. They borrowed ideas from nature and from fiction and from each other. They failed constantly and learned from every failure. They competed with each other to produce better solutions and then shared their discoveries freely. Korath found Maria in her lab one evening surrounded by holographic displays showing engine schematics. She had not left the room in 30 hours. "How do you do this?" he asked her. "How do you create so much so quickly?" Maria rubbed her tired eyes. "I think it is because we know we are not special." Korath did not understand. "Explain." "Kovanni lived for centuries. You have time to be careful. Time to test everything properly. Time to wait for the perfect solution." "I do Nirin." She gestured at the displays around her. "Humans live maybe 80 years if we are lucky. We do not have time to wait. We have to try things and fail and try again, because if we wait for perfection, we will be dead before it arrives. That seems inefficient. It is incredibly inefficient. We waste so much effort on ideas that do not work. But every once in a while, someone has a breakthrough that changes everything. And because we are always trying new things, those breakthroughs come faster than they would otherwise." She smiled at him. "Your species has 3,000 years of careful refinement. We have 300 years of desperate innovation. Different approaches. Both have value." By the end of the first year, Earth had a fleet of 300 warships. They were smaller than Dominion vessels, but faster and more agile. By the end of the second year, the fleet had grown to 1,000 ships crewed by humans and Kovanni working side by side. By the third year, the Allied forces launched their first offensive operations. Jack Harris had been promoted to full commander and assigned as the human liaison officer aboard the Starfall. He and Velith had developed a partnership that neither of them had expected. She provided experience and knowledge of galactic warfare. He provided a human perspective that constantly surprised her with its creativity and audacity. Their first mission together was a strike against a Dominion supply convoy. Military doctrine said they were outnumbered and should withdraw. Jack suggested a different approach. They hit the convoy from an unexpected angle, using the gravity well of a nearby moon to mask their approach. They destroyed 7 supply ships and escaped before the Dominion escorts could respond. Word of the victory spread across both fleets. For the first time in recorded history, a Dominion convoy had been ambushed and destroyed. The enemy that had seemed invincible had been bloodied by a species that had barely discovered space travel. More victories followed. Human tactics proved devastatingly effective against an enemy that had grown complacent over 10,000 years of easy conquest. The Dominion had never faced an opponent that refused to fight conventionally. They did not know how to respond to guerrilla attacks and hit-and-run strikes and psychological warfare. The Allied fleet grew stronger with every engagement. Captured Dominion technology was studied and improved. Liberated worlds provided new allies and resources. Species that had surrendered to the Dominion centuries ago began to rebel, inspired by the example of these strange, fearless creatures from a tiny blue planet. Velith watched the transformation with wonder. These humans who had seemed so primitive just 3 years ago were now leading a galactic resistance movement. They had taken the despair of her people and transformed it into hope. The final battle was coming. Everyone knew it. The Dominion would not tolerate this challenge to their supremacy. They would gather their full strength and attempt to crush the rebellion once and for all. Jack Harris smiled when he heard the reports of the massive Dominion fleet assembling for the attack. "Good," he said. "Let them come. We will be ready." The Dominion fleet arrived at the Nexa crossing with 3,000 warships. It was the largest military force assembled in a century. The Supreme Commander had decided to end this rebellion personally. He would crush these upstart humans and their alien allies and make an example that would discourage any future resistance for the next 1,000 years. The Allied fleet waited for them with 800 vessels. By every traditional calculation, the outcome was certain. The Dominion had nearly 4 times the numbers and larger ships with heavier weapons. Military analysts across the galaxy predicted the battle would last less than an hour before the Alliance was annihilated. Admiral Patterson stood on the bridge of the carrier Liberty and watched the enemy fleet approach. His tactical officer, Commander Ryan Clark, worked at his console running final checks on the battle plan they had spent months preparing. The bridge crew moved with calm efficiency. There was fear in their eyes, but determination too. "All ships report ready, Admiral," Ryan said. Patterson nodded. "Signal the fleet. Execute Phase 1. The Allied ships did something the Dominion had never seen before. Instead of forming a defensive line, they scattered. 800 vessels broke into dozens of smaller groups and spread across the battlefield in what looked like chaos. Dominion commanders laughed at the display. These fools were making themselves easy targets. Then the attacks began. Human fighters launched from carriers, hidden behind asteroid clusters. They struck Dominion ships from angles that should have been impossible using gravity wells and debris fields to mask their approach. They hit fast and withdrew before the larger ships could respond. The first Dominion destroyer exploded within 10 minutes. Then another. Then 3 more in rapid succession. The Starfall led a strike group against the enemy flank, with Valeth commanding from her bridge and Jack Harris coordinating with the human squadrons. They used a tactic Jack called wolfpack hunting, where smaller, faster ships worked together to isolate and destroy larger targets. A Dominion battlecruiser that should have swatted them aside found itself surrounded and overwhelmed by coordinated fire from 12 directions. "Their formation is breaking," Valeth observed as she watched a tactical display. "They do not know how to respond to this." "They have fought the same way for 10,000 years, Jack replied. "They expect their enemies to stand and die. They have never faced anyone crazy enough to charge straight at them." The battle raged for hours. The Dominion adapted, slowly learning to counter some of the human tactics. Allied ships were destroyed. Good people died. But for every Allied vessel lost, the enemy lost 3. The numbers that should have guaranteed Dominion victory were being eroded steadily. Ryan Clark had spent 2 years studying Dominion battle patterns, and he had discovered something crucial. Their command ships always positioned themselves in specific formations. If those ships were destroyed, the rest of the fleet fell into confusion. The Dominion had never bothered to develop backup command structures because they had never needed them. No enemy had ever survived long enough to threaten their leadership. "Admiral," Ryan reported, "I have identified the flagship. It is hanging back behind the main formation, protected by a ring of heavy cruisers." Patterson studied the display. "Can we reach it?" "Not with conventional tactics. Their formation is too tight." Jack Harris spoke over the communication channel. "Admiral, the Starfall can get through. We've been modifying our shields based on the data from previous engagements. We can absorb their fire long enough to make a run at the flagship." "That is suicide," Patterson replied. "It is a calculated risk. If we take out their command structure, the entire fleet will lose coordination. Your forces can mop up the rest." Valeth looked at Jack. You did not mention this plan to me. I was hoping we would not need it. He met her gaze steadily. But we do need it now. This is our chance to end this war. Valeth considered for only a moment. Then she gave the order. All power to forward shields. Navigation plot an intercept course for the Dominion flagship. All weapons prepare for sustained fire. The Starfall broke from the Allied formation and accelerated toward the heart of the enemy fleet. Dominion ships turned to intercept, but they were too slow. The Kovanni cruiser moved with a speed that should have been impossible for a ship its size, driven by engines that human engineers had upgraded beyond anything the galaxy had seen. Energy beams struck the Starfall from all directions. The shields held, barely. Warning alarms screamed across the bridge as systems overloaded and hull plates buckled. Crew members were thrown from their stations. Fires erupted in lower decks. But they kept going. The Dominion flagship grew larger in the view screen. It was massive, a city-sized vessel bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Supreme Commander Vorthan stood on its bridge watching the approaching Starfall with contempt. One damaged cruiser thought it could challenge him. The arrogance of these primitives was almost amusing. He stopped laughing when the first missiles hit. Human weapons designers had created something new for this battle. They called them Cascade Warheads. Each missile released dozens of smaller projectiles that overwhelmed point defense systems through sheer volume. The flagship's shields flickered under the assault. The Starfall closed to knife-fighting range and unleashed everything it had. Beam weapons carved through weakened shields. Missiles found gaps in the armor. A human fighter squadron led by pilots, who knew they would not survive, dove straight into the flagship's engine section and detonated their entire payload. The explosion tore the Dominion flagship apart. Across the battlefield, the effect was immediate. Dominion ships that had been fighting with coordinated precision suddenly fell into disarray. Commands stopped coming. The hive mind that controlled their fleet shattered. Some ships continued fighting on instinct. Others began to withdraw. Others simply drifted waiting for orders that would never arrive. Admiral Patterson gave the command. All ships advance. Finish them. The Allied fleet surged forward. Hours of desperate fighting became a rout as Dominion ships fled into hyperspace. The enemy that had conquered 400 worlds ran from 800 vessels, crewed by humans and Corvani and a dozen other species who had dared to hope. The Battle of Nexar Crossing was over. The Dominion had been broken. Valeth stood on the battered bridge of the Starfall and looked at the destruction around her. Half her crew was dead. The ship would need months of repairs. Jack Harris sat slumped in a chair with blood running from a cut on his forehead and a smile on his face. "We did it," he said simply. Valeth nodded. She wanted to say something profound, but words seemed inadequate. Instead, she reached out and took his hand in one of hers. He looked surprised for a moment, and then his smile widened. "You finally learned the gesture," he said. "I learned many things from your people." The war continued for years after Nexar Crossing, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Dominion fractured and collapsed as conquered species rose up against their weakened masters. World after world was liberated. The galaxy transformed. And when historians wrote about the conflict that changed everything, they always began with the same words. They came to Earth for repairs. They found something more. They found hope. They found courage. They found a species that refused to accept that any enemy was unbeatable. They found humanity,